Exciting. Shall we go? Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much for popping along. I know it's actually quite a long series of things to listen to and some very exciting announcements this morning. I thought it was a brilliant start to the day, but I realise that people start to, it's hard to listen to a lot of different people's views. What we're hoping to talk to you, what I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon for half an hour or so is our experience with Mendix and some of the things that we've now started to do in terms of controlling the amount of innovation. It's a positive thing to be able to stand here and say, but actually there's so much that we've been able to do. We're now having to start thinking about how do we put those into classifications and how do we kind of keep the business expectation about what they're going to get and manage the queue in effect. Right, so I'm going to just go through a little bit of that and some of our history with Mendix. Okay, so we actually were very early adopters with Mendix about 4 years ago. Please say it's always been like a reasonably stable thing, a very stable application innovation platform for us. But back in those early days, there was a lot to work through. But it was also kind of our start on being innovative. It's not so much the product itself that I would talk about today, but it's like the product of trying to take a tool like Mendix, which allows you to be very innovative and do some very rapid production of applications. And how do you actually use that to kind of change the organization a little bit? So I'm not going to tell you a lot about LV. We're an insurance company from the UK. We're one of the largest mutual insurers in the UK. And we'd grown very rapidly up to 2012. So when I joined 6 years prior to that, we were about 1,800 people. We'd grown to 6,000 people. It was, frankly, quite an innovative time in that first period of growth. We had a new CEO and a big sort of change of direction and a big rebranding, and a lot of things had happened. But by 2012, the scale of the organization had put us back into a position which wasn't so innovative. We had a lot of things stuck on the backlog of development, what we called our strategic agenda, that were circulating round year after year, that we said, well, actually, we just can't do that. We haven't got enough money left. We haven't got enough time left to do it. The traditional methods of doing it are reckoning that it's going to be too expensive to do, and especially that stuff which was not mandatory. So the stuff that got on was the regulatory, the mandatory, the pricing changes, and anything that was creative or different or unproven was extremely difficult to do. So we wanted a tool set, not just a tool set though, a mechanism and a process to start doing some of that stuff. So we created a team called Fast Track, which had separate funding, which was given a remit to say, okay, just go and have a go, try do it differently. And by doing it differently, I mean do it differently with the way that we got people together, this collaborative approach that people are always talking about nowadays, and it was slightly different. There wasn't so much talk about agile, and there wasn't so much talk about the sort of rapid development techniques that everybody seems to have latched onto nowadays, but fundamentally not a new invention. I think the picture of Darwin illustrates that people talked about working together. Collaboration is what drives results. So it's not a new thing, but we were trying to. It's a new thing for a lot of organizations, and somehow we seem to have forgotten that you need to do that. So we started back in 2012. We started with some really small projects, and that's some advice that you've heard several times already, and I would absolutely underline, start with something relatively small that's relatively self-contained and get that under your belt before you start trying to redevelop the entirety of your IT infrastructure. But it's just from the point of view of where we came from, we had a relatively small start, but we had a very rapidly growing queue of people who said, actually, this is quite cool, you can do things differently. Not just with Mendix, we've used a few technologies in the fast track domain, but we started to do like a lot more work with the business, and we're trying to change a bit of the organization. And it started to introduce new ways of thinking to people, just a little bit at a time. And it started with things that we didn't talk about back then. Right? It sounds like it was a long time ago. It's only sort of 6 years, but in this world of innovation, 6 years does seem like a long time ago nowadays. But we started to introduce, the acceptance of a new vocabulary. And that's important, because if you've got an innovation function that's just kind of over there somewhere and doing some funky stuff that nobody wants to really talk about, and they're safest just left alone because they're a bit weird, right? Then you're not really achieving what you need to do. We started to get the vocabulary of things like test and learn and agile working accepted and used in the general parlance of our executive teams. Right? It was because they saw some small successes going on in various areas of the company. And just that basic acceptance of that's not a funny word to use is a really important step to look for. Right? It's important to just get people comfortable with doing things differently is okay, and nobody died. Well, relatively few people dying anyway is good enough in my book. But fairly soon along the road, so we had a little function that did innovation, right? And we did, typically we were set up to do experimentation on strategic level objectives that we had at the board level, and they were typically things we would spend a couple of months on and maybe 30, 50, 100 grand on, but they were relatively large. One of the first things that we started to recognize in terms of classifying things differently was they were not the only type of innovation that we could do. Right? We could take some of those larger things, and the effort that was put into developing a new way of doing something, and it could have been a Mendix application, and a classic one was some workflow work we did with one area of the business. When we suddenly started looking around to the rest of the business, we realised that actually that didn't need another £30,000, £40,000 experiment. What it needed was somebody to pick up that activity and just do it again 5 more times somewhere else. Right? And I'll refer you back to those of you who were listening to Simon last night of the settlers and the town planners, settlers and innovators or pioneers. Right? Once we'd done the pioneering, and we'd done it once, and we knew kind of how to extract the gold from the ground, actually you just needed to do a little bit more of that. You just needed somebody to take that out and redo it again. There's a different type of innovation that we were actually attempting. So we launched this thing called Digitize the Enterprise, which was about going out and talking to the people in our at a departmental level and saying, actually, what kind of problems have you got? What we were able to do then, our vision actually was to take things we'd already developed and redeploy them somewhere else. What we kind of found was that we started doing variants. Some of the things we did in that practice were actually new developments. So we would kind of, rather than take something that we'd used, we'd come across a problem that was worthy of fixing, and we would actually invent something new. So it was a bit more pioneering, but it was at a lower scale. It was really small and simple stuff that was being turned around quite quickly. And the fast track team carried on doing the bigger experimental learning with other development. And in some cases, we got the mainstream development to take on that. In order to continue to be iterative and drive new innovations out of a smallish team, and it's quite important to keep it small in my personal opinion, you've got to get rid of that stuff, because otherwise you end up that after a year or so, we suddenly find that actually 50% of the time we're innovating, and 50% of the time we're doing the second part of the amendment for the thing that we did 2 years ago, or version 2 or version 3 of it. Right? And we didn't really want to do that because the purpose of the team was to continue to cut the frontier of the innovative development. Right? So it then becomes a little bit confused. And in fact, we ended up with an awful lot on our radar, so much so that we created this way of looking at what was coming into our innovation space. It's a part of a report we use, the radar thing on the bottom, which looks at, for each area of the company, what have we got that's just starting in terms of, is this a good thing to do? What is it that we're doing experimentation on, i.e. we're proving that we can do it and we're doing our first week's prototype, and then what's coming up to being landed, to going live, or being discarded in some cases actually. You mustn't be afraid to throw things away. So, but as the deliveries start to pile up, we started to think, well actually there's another classification in there. Right? It's not just what stage they're at and who they're for and what else they're doing, and they're all kind of important things to segregate, but we realized that there were actually very distinct types of things that we were doing within each of those developments. Okay? So some of them were investments that we were doing to try and prove a business concept that actually weren't the solution. Right? So some of the more aligned to the very early things we did, which was actually, we don't know whether this will work at all. Let's try something. Let's prove it in terms of customer acceptability, in terms of marketability, in terms of kind of the actual profitability to the company. And those we classify as a test and invest activity, because we're not providing the solution, but we're accelerating the proof that it actually might work. And then we've got, at the other end of the scale, at the bottom there, we've got the things that we were doing which were innovative within the business, which were effectively often using Mendix actually, quite easy to deliver within a business area, a complete solution that was pretty much pretty much finished. And then in the middle, you've got the things which you could deliver for somebody within the innovation budget, but when they landed, they almost certainly wanted to carry on. And some of the things that we delivered, say, 2 years ago, have carried on and had version 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. Those are very important to land into a delivery group that's got the capability to do it. So we started to think about classifying this work in that way in order to help the understanding of the business. And it's kind of important to not only the development and the innovation team that you think about that classification, but also to the people that you're delivering it to. Because when we're doing this kind of one and done activity, it's the simplest type of application that we approach, which might be, it's not necessarily governing the size of it. Might be a 1 week sprint in extreme cases. It could be a 6 week project. But the important thing is that when you finish that, it's finished. Right? It obviously, for all applications, a corporate environment, there's an essential element of who's going to kind of maintain that. And given that in the Mendix World we use cloud-hosted supported applications, half of that's already sorted. The environment kind of runs pretty much on its own, but we still need somebody to look after the applications. In some cases, what we're finding with this is if we deliberately set out to do this, we don't really want any ongoing drag for this after we've delivered it, by being very focused on keeping the application in a configurable capability. So in terms of thinking about what the business might want to change over the next 3 to 4 months or years in using the application, you think about setting that up from a very highly configurable capability. So you make sure that they're not running back to IT to amend or change or add categories or purchase types or whatever it might be. And that's been really successful. But what we're also doing here is training up business users. And it was great to see this morning the web modeler being announced, because that will be a great benefit to this. We've actually had some of our business users actually trained up on the modeler. We tend to allow them to do relatively cosmetic changes. They don't tend to get deep into modeling, but exactly what web modeler is designed to do, and that really will help us to separate that out and make that even more effective. But what we're finding is that with the modern the use of technology that's growing so much, especially in the younger generation of our employees, a lot of them know far more about how to develop systems than we do in IT. So it's really useful to leverage that power and capability and creativity to continue to move on with these small applications. And basically, they are, as it says on the tin, they're one and done. We've done them, we've handed it over. We very rarely have to do anything about it. Right? If there is a kind of major issue, we've set up our standard operational support guys to be able to look after Mendix things big and small, but these things achieve independence. It is really important because it gives you the capability to do many more of these, because you don't have that drag on the organization. It's an interesting thing in terms of that development model, because it's kind of pioneering and town planning in one go, right? So these things are not mutually exclusive; they're just models. But that's embedding those two things that says I've done the new thing. It's kind of actually more in the town planning area, because we've kind of worked out how to put houses up, and now we're just going around putting houses up. It's a bit like our Barratt Homes version of building in the town. Okay, but then, and I've touched on this at the other end. There are things that come up in your organization where you're saying, I don't really know that I want to do that. Some of them you can discard on paper, but some of them do need some innovative investment in order to prove that capability and run through it. So where we approach a project which is in this category, by understanding that right at the start, it really helps the business to understand that actually, at the end of this, I'm not going to have my completed application, but it is, the purpose of it is kind of replacing that massively horrible cycle that you used to have in any complicated delivery within the organization, which was kind of write a business requirements document and then sit around the table arguing about how long it's going to cost, and then go back to IT several times and say that's far too much and we can't afford it. And all of that cycle, it's really powerful to use innovation to prove all that stuff out, because when you put something in front of somebody and they can actually see, how it will be used, and they can amend it and they can tweak it, even in a non-functional or a kind of very much investigatory manner, it rattles out all of that challenge, or a lot of the challenge about where you're going to do it. And now with integration and the cloud services that we're seeing being announced today, it becomes possible to make those things fairly richly functional. Right? You can build an awful lot of your application, but if you know that you're doing it on a test and invest basis, you know that at the end of that, you're just really creating the business case for doing it, because you've seen it, you've touched it, you've worked out what it's going to be, and you can drive that. It's really helped us in terms of classifying this away, because in some occasions we'd started off with a lot of business enthusiasm for an innovation team that was going to help us to do this. We've done a test and invest type project before we had that classification, and you get to the end of it and they've actually got no real way, they haven't really thought enough about where they're going to get the budget from to actually go out and do it, or to do the next stage, or to if it's using a combination of technologies or not in the Mendix technology, you've got to get the investment in the licensing or the product that you're going to use for it. Right? If they haven't thought that through at the outset, you get to the end of the project, it all gets a bit squeaky. So by by understanding that really up front, we found that's been really helpful as you get people to start thinking about it before you go. And then probably in organizational terms, the most difficult one to think about is the ones where, as an innovation group, you are going to deliver the first MVP, very heavily used words nowadays, but you deliver the first viable product, but realistically you know that this is a long-term solution for that business area. It can be in a lot of different ways. You might deliver it for one department or one product. I was working in the Home Office, so it was, you don't expect people to get it, but over the years I kind of think when you've got tool sets like Mendix that you can actually deliver something really rapidly with, people would eventually go, wow, that's brilliant, I'm going to start doing that. The truth is that that's not a very easy transition. The majority of people will still fight you. What they're doing is they're clinging to their jobs, they're clinging to their self-belief. And maybe that's true for some of you, right? The way you've done it, the traditional mechanics of projects, the long tail, the big BRDs, maybe you actually believe that's the right way to do it. And in some cases, maybe it is, but I've never seen a better result out of a long-winded waterfall process personally than I have out of a rapid agile one. But you are attacking people's fundamental belief about the way we should do things. So if you're just starting on a journey of kind of going, wow, that's good, I can do this really quick, I wouldn't expect everybody to go after the first one or two iterations that everybody will just get it, because they won't. And one of my biggest frustrations is when, if you talk to consultancies, which, like Simon, I try to avoid really, but if you talk to some consultants, they'll still come up to us and go, oh, what you need to do is find a little business area and build something, and then get the first example out, and then everybody will know how you do it. And it's like, well, it really isn't that simple. Right? If you are setting off down this journey to change your organization, it's a pretty hard slog. We've been going at it 4 years, and we're still considered the disruptive bunch in the corner. But look for littler signs of improvement. Like I said in the first place, the vocabulary has started to change. People accept that test and learn is a good thing. They kind of get these categories that we've introduced to sort of think, oh yeah, I understand that what we're doing is, it's comforting to some people to say, actually, we're going to take on this innovation for this area. It's going to improve something in that area of the business, and is a one-and-done category. They kind of get what that means, and they know that when it's done, that, they've seen us do several of those, and they don't keep asking about who's going to do this after that, because they know we've thought about some of those things, right? So you have to introduce structure and terminology and categorization and all these things, because actually people that like the standard way it's been working for 40 years can latch on to some of those things, and I genuinely think it helps you to drive it. So, but you also want to make sure that you've allowed yourself to continue to think about the next thing. So what are we, so that's why I brought in, over the years, we've kind of gone for the DTE stuff, and we've gone for the accelerated delivery stuff, and we've started running internal labs this year. It's a continual journey of the surrounding infrastructure that actually you can use tools like Mendix to help you deliver the code for. But frankly, if you don't do all the rest of that and continue to do all the rest of that, then you're not really taking full advantage of it. So just cranking out applications is not enough. There's a whole science, a whole methodology to this, but not just one methodology. What I've been talking about is what we've chosen to do. The right thing for you might be somewhat different, but what I would encourage you to do is think about the mechanisms and the models and the designs of what you're doing to make sure it's fitting in and has a sustainable future. So it's really all I was going to say today. Happy to take any questions. I've deliberately finished a little bit early, given the schedule's running on a bit. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thanks very much. Anybody got a question? Well, not you. I think the biggest challenge is getting to accept people in the wider organisation the need to do something differently. We've still got teams who will still insist that what they do is Java development, and they still put out budgets of literally, 20 times what we could do it for in Mendix, and you can't change that mentality, and that staggers me, frankly. I can't understand what it is. There's still, getting that belief that this is actually quite a complex. We've done some complex things, as you know. We've done some applications which are full-blown insurance products, rating, self-service, claims management, and everything that have run quite sustainably for a number of years. But you've still got pockets of the organisation that kind of will not embrace it. And not everybody's going to use the Mendix development, but it's not Mendix they're not embracing, it's their different approach. It's the kind of radical, or the more agile and innovative, and test and learn and start small. And I speak to so many people who they kind of go, we've trained people over the years, I think, to kind of recognize that once they've got their foot through the door of a project, in an IT project, if they don't jam absolutely every requirement they've ever had in and get it done in that first iteration, they'll never get it. And we've done that. We've trained people that that's how it works. And this world is much more about do a little thing, let's see how it works, and then see how it feels to you, and then let's build on it next month or next year, and let's have an iterative cycle of development. But training people that that's genuinely true and can happen is really hard. So there's still a lot of people locked in the kind of, I don't understand how that works, and I don't really want to understand it, and I don't really want to change, so I'm just going to stick with what I know. And I think that's the hardest thing, is getting an organisation to change is really difficult.